project started with an idea in my head and a hand-drawn sketch. I then replicated that sketch, again hand-drawn, into full size using cardboard to get an idea of the true size and shape. Once I was happy with them, I used them as templates to trace and cut out the shapes from 17mm construction grade ply I picked up from a council chuck out. The ply was perfect because I wanted the bike to have a bit of a raw look anyway. Each one made of 2 layers of ply laminated together. I cut out one of the layers and refined the shape by hand. Once I was happy with it, I used it as a template to shape the other 3 using a flush trim bit in the router table. The edges on the outside faces of each layer were rounded over with a 1/2 inch roundover bit. Next I had to make the steel mounts for the rear wheel. I cut out the mounting brackets from 5mm steel brackets I bought from the hardware store. The axle brackets needed to be inset into one of the halves of each side so that the 2 layers forming each side could be laminated together. I set the depth of the router bit straight from the bracket and cut the insets by hand. With the 2 brackets still tacked together, I placed them in their final position in one of the inset layers from one side of the bike and drilled the mounting holes through. I then took the opposing half from the other side of the bike and lined the 2 up to extend the mounting holes all the way through that side. This would ensure the 2 brackets lined up exactly. Then it was just a matter of putting the 2 layers from side A together and from side B together and drilling the mounting holes all the way through. Now the 2 rear frame sections could be glued together. The frame was almost complete. I decided the shape needed further refining, so I used a thin strip of timber to form smooth curves and act as a guide for a flush trim bit in the router. For the forks I used 28mm dowel, but a short length at the top needed to be 25mm to fit into the fork mounting bracket, also from the donor bike. But I don't have a lathe, so I came up with this setup here to use the router table and a straight bit to turn the ends down to size. This worked really well. Basically I just traced the bottom of the fork mount onto a bit of ply. So I've got that board in place now, and apart from cutting it to shape, it looks like it's going to work out exactly as I want. For the front wheel mounts, I cut off the ends of the steel bike forks from the donor bike, which were the perfect size for the 28mm dowel. With the front wheel mounts in place, I assembled the forks to the front wheel and the fork bracket, and then after squaring it all up, making sure the alignment was right, I could drill the holes through the forks for the bolts. Next I drilled out a long narrow mortise in the main frame for the steel flat bar that was the seat post. You'll notice here I originally made the frame connecting spaces out of ply, but I changed those to 28mm dowel, which looked much better. I used a guide to drill a half circle on the front edge of the frame with a hole saw, and then used a Forstner bit to drill the holes for the original mounting hardware that came off the donor bike. The last thing to make was the handlebars, which were also made from 28mm dowel. Using this jig, I was also able to mark the center line through the cuts, which would be used as reference lines for other cuts. I cut the slots in the ends of the dowels with another simple jig and a 12mm straight bit in the router. Because I didn't actually have any 12mm ply, I laminated two pieces of 6mm together for each spline. Once they were dry, I used this same template to get a nice curve on them and trim them on the router table. I left the splines a little wider on the outside so they could be shaped and flushed by hand. As I said before, I wanted these splines to look the part, so I drilled a few holes of different sizes in them. I first drilled pilot holes, then drilled the final size hole from both sides to eliminate any tear out. With the addition of some chrome dome nuts, the handlebars turned out way cool.